And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. And when I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now, with faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love.
Beautifully read. Title for today, Enough Wine to Go Around. Enough wine to go around. Now, when I was a chaplain, we saw a lot of different wounds and sicknesses. Hi! Oh, gorgeous. Very good. Well, yes. This is the daddy show. Come on. No way. This is the Jesus show, Daddy. Get out of the way. Bring the kids up here. So we saw a lot of wounds and sicknesses, and you got used to it, kind of. Most of the nurses were fascinated with carnage, so they would just line up and go see whatever there was to see, and that was their calling. If you know any nurses, you know they're just completely interested in these things, and it's their calling, and they went and would look at all of it, and I would stay in the lounge and drink coffee, because I didn't have to do that. I didn't have any seminary classes on those things, and I was one who would go, hi, I'm Josh, I'm the chaplain. Ah! Sometimes, and that was a little embarrassing. But anyway, so we had a woman come in who had a recently healed wound, and she had gotten very, very sick. She had fevers and felt generally very ill. She had this healed wound that was red and hot to the touch, and the doctors assessed it and looked at what was going on, and they found out the wound itself was not healed, but that the skin had healed over it. The skin had healed over it, and underneath the skin there was an infection that continued to thrive and make her sick. And they had to reopen the wound, expose it to the air and the light, and the true healing could begin. Now that brought in a parade of nurses to come and see what was going on, and I went that way, and they went that way. But it was called a closed wound infection or an abscess. There's a bunch of different names for them. Paul is speaking into a similar situation here. The Corinthian community is troubled. The Corinthian community has an infection. Corinth was and still is a city in Greece that was built around two seaports. Because of the transient traffic in Corinth, it kind of developed, quote-unquote, a reputation. Plato, the great Greek philosopher, would say, that's a Corinthian girl. And everybody knew that meant she was a prostitute, if you said she was Corinthian. And to fool around with somebody in bed before you were married or outside of marriage was called to Corinthianize a person. Whether or not the reputation was deserved, it stuck. Philosophies, worldviews, religions, and cultic practices were similar. Corinth was a transient population with people from all over who brought their worldviews with them. Now, I found a similar population when I was in Vancouver in British Columbia. You would have a Sikh temple, a synagogue, a Baptist church, Quaker meeting house, and a Unitarian church all on the same block, within a mile of each other. Vancouver was a city on the ocean, and from all over the world, people came with their worldviews and stayed there, from all over the place. And in Corinth, Paul was speaking into. This often made for the in-crowd and out-crowd grandstanding, made for a fascination with the latest bit of knowledge and secrets to come along. Did you hear this new thing? Have you read the latest scroll? Have you gone to see the wise man who has this new truth for us? Oh, you didn't? I'm sorry. You're not part of our group. We're this group. That's you. This is us. You are them. And this is the infection that Paul found quickly. After the initial healing, the initial honeymoon period of faith and joy that came to the Corinthian community when they met Christ, he found their social sphere falling back into what it used to do. Those old habits, in crowd, out crowd, you're them, we're us. He found the infection underneath. So we're continuing our series on Jesus, the demolition artist. We're looking at the early cause and career of Jesus, and at some points the early start of the church as well. Some of the first writings of the community of Christians. When Jesus arrived on the scene, he had to demolish expectations of who he was and what he was about. He had to take down the idea that he would be a conqueror and take over the world and bring Israel to military power. He had to bring down the idea he was there to do magic tricks for people's amusement, but instead did miracles as part of his vision, part of who he was. We checked out Hebrews, some of the early writings of the church last week. This is about Jesus demolishing the idea that he would somehow be completely different than us, but that he came among us, that he came to journey with us and journey into the human journey all the way to the point of death. He became the firstborn among many brothers and sisters and attached himself to us. He shared in our flesh and blood, as the writer of Hebrews puts it. I hope it has become clear that Jesus came with his own vision and his own grip on his identity. He wasn't beholden to the ideas that people had about him, and he didn't come in the manner we thought he would. He enters triumphantly on a donkey. He spends time with broken outsiders and ignores the in-crowd. He makes up his own inner circle of weirdos and rejects and criminals. And so he comes into our lives as well. As C.S. Lewis says, he doesn't want to do away with parts of our old self, but to kill it. He doesn't want to renovate or throw a new coat of paint over dry rot, but to take the sin and selfishness down to the ground, down to the foundation, and then that has to go too, so that he can rebuild us into his image. John the Baptist's chosen metaphor for him was the threshing floor, where the farmer crushes the wheat and then throws it in the air, and throws it in the air, and throws it in the air for hours and hours and hours, where the desert wind comes across and blows the chaff away, the useless chaff, so that the kernel remains. The Lord does this in our own lives, breaks and separates us from the useless sin within us, throws us and burns it out of us. I think of my own life where I've seen some of this happen. I came out of seminary with a head full of ideas, complex theologies, Greek and Hebrew words, various philosophies, and bad poetry. Very, very bad poetry. And in the debut of my ministry, when my career started, when I was finally out there doing ministry with this head full of ideas, nobody cared. I was a chaplain at a hospital. Nobody wanted to hear that. If you're recovering from gallbladder surgery or looking down at a stump where your leg used to be, you don't want to hear the finer points of Western theology. I've tried, it doesn't work. Nobody cared, they didn't want it, all I'd trained for. The thresher was tossing me in the air, letting that arid desert wind clean and blow that away, what didn't matter. And so finally, when someone did need a sermon written, I'd seen some life and death, I'd been humbled, and I could write what mattered, I hope. I don't know, that's up to you guys to figure out. Everything in our lives can be seen this way. What is the great thresher trying to get you to let go of? What is the demolition artist trying to take down? Whatever he's after, it is creaking and crawling with black mold and about to fall over of its own weight. You let him in, you let him take care of it, you let it go. Are you finding yourself too identified by your job? Are you finding that you give the energy meant for God, meant for your spouse, meant for your kids, all at the office, and you get home and you're nothing? Let the demolition artist in. Let him break your hold on that so your identity will be found in him. Are you finding yourself too identified by your past? Back there in your mind, reliving the old glory days and ignoring what, and more importantly, who is right in front of you? Let the demolition artist in. Let him break down that idolatry so that you can let the past be just that, the past. so you can be thankful and move on? Are you finding yourself preoccupied with money? And I don't mean being wealthy. None of us are in danger of that, so turn your ears back on for a second. Thank you. Constantly thinking about money. Will I have enough of it? Will I be secure? What does this cost? What does that cost? Driving yourself crazy and neglecting what really matters in life. Invite that demolition artist into the financial corner of your soul and mind. Let him do his sacred work. You know what Michelangelo's famous statue of David looked like when he first started? A block of stone. A block of stone that had been sitting in a churchyard for 2 years and gathering the elements. They called it the giant. Nobody knew what to do with it. Which is kind of interesting. David came out of the giant. That's a whole other thing. A block of stone. He brought the image out of it slowly. It took him 2 years to do this. And he brought it out by subtraction, by taking away the excess, by taking away what didn't need to be there. And so God often works with us. This is a poem I like. I asked for strength and God gave me difficulties to make me strong. I asked for wisdom and God gave me problems to solve. I asked for prosperity and God gave me brain and brawn to work. I asked for courage and God gave me danger to overcome. I asked for love and God gave me troubled people to help. I asked for favors and God gave me opportunities. I received nothing I wanted. I received everything I needed. I love this poem, whatever you want to call it. It's the kind of thing you might see on a cross-stitch sampler, but it doesn't make it any less true. It's not in the Bible, by the way, but all those ideas are there. Jesus does some of his best work by subtraction. Jesus does some of his best work by subtraction. Paul knew that. He had been spiritually, theologically, and finally physically blinded by Jesus on the road to Damascus. The demolition artist had been at work on him. And we're going to talk about some of the most famous writing he ever did today. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the Corinthian church was a troubled community. They found themselves falling into old habits and patterns, despite having met Christ through the ministry of Paul. They had tasted of the peace and harmony of the gospel, but were now having trouble after the honeymoon period. Corinth was a place where new worldviews, new gods, new faiths came and went, and people were always trying to one-up each other by being the first to scoop up the latest trend. You tried yoga, well, you got to try hot yoga. Oh, you tried hot yoga, you got to try heavy metal yoga. You tried this, you tried that. And so happened to the Corinthian church as well. Now you look a few pages back in chapter 3, verse 3 and 4. For while there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh and behaving in a human way? For one says, I follow Paul, one says, I follow Apollos. Are you not being merely human? I follow Paul, I follow Apollos. There is nothing mysterious or biblical about this. This is plain old sloganeering. I like Trump. I like Clinton. I like pancakes. I like French toast. I like hot yoga. I like upside down yoga. I like yoga in the bottom of a pool. Whatever. Great taste, less filling. It's been going on forever. And here they are taking the gospel and making it into another in-crowd, out-crowd thing. They're simply overlaying the divisions and strife and backstabbing they knew all too well with new language. Or to grab my metaphor from earlier, it's what's called a closed wound infection. The skin has closed over the deeper infection, and so the infection will get worse, and the body will get sicker. Another metaphor that might be a little less medical for you, if that makes you squeamish. Those tub liner things always make me a little nervous. You see those things where they're like, you have this tub and it's crawling with like live mold, and it's like black and gross, and they're like, put this liner over it. Okay. But it could get worse and worse and worse. Like the water could get in between them. I've been researching this. It's very interesting. The water could get in between them. It could be more dangerous. The smell could get worse. And instead of having it out, you cover it over. And it stays the same way. And it stays the same way. You're dressing up the problem, throwing a coat of paint on it, rather than getting to the bottom of it. And so Paul is pointing out the problem here. Saying this isn't just another fad to come and go. You can't overlay your infected social structure, your in-crowd, out-crowd little sloganeering thing, the whole structure has to change. Now, one of the issues at hand here is the gift of tongues. And tongues has been a huge discussion through a good part of church history. A lot of passionately held viewpoints on it within the body of Christ. Tongues seems to have a private version, as Paul talks about in other places, where you're speaking a private prayer language between you and God. This language that may not sound intelligible to others or even yourself, but it's from your heart to God. And I know wonderful Christian people who do that. Wonderful Christian people. And I know wonderful Christian people who have never done it. So I know people on both sides of that. I don't want to go too far into the discussion, but it's one of these things that's been part of a church discussion, especially right now, in church history for the last 100 years or so, very strongly. There's another version of tongues that Paul describes, and that is speaking in other tongues publicly. And when this is done, there is to be someone there interpreting for what's said to the encouragement of the community. So there is a huge theological discussion about what that means, and enough pages and books to fill an Olympic pool. And it is another discussion that we will have at some point. Not really our concern today, but it gives some context to our discussion here. Now, one of the big secrets I'll let you in on, and one of the big secrets of the history of the church, etc., is that Christians did not invent the practice of tongues. It was everywhere at the time. All the cults were doing it, all the new worldviews were doing it, all kinds of people were doing it. And it became a big thing. It was not an uncommon practice. And that became the problem. If you were part of the in crowd, then you spoke in tongues. If you were very spiritual. If you sat at the popular kids' lunch table, then you were a tongue speaker. And people would come and sort of bow down to you and share your wisdom with us, great tongue speaker. They were the elite, the privileged. And Paul tells them, and the horse they rode in on, to go jump in a lake. He spends so much of Corinthians talking about spiritual gifts,